when you are convinced that something is a certain way, you are in your own way of experiencing the miracle that is wrapped up inside of every experience that we're handed, hardships, as well as gifts, all of that. There's always something to glean from an experience, a positive thing to take away. And you have to get out of your own way sometimes to experience that.
Welcome my guest, Saje Dyer. She's a speaker, author, and the daughter of the late Dr. Wayne Dyer. Dr. Wayne Dyer was the beloved father of motivation, but Saje and her 7 siblings was simply dad. Saje grew up in Boca Raton, Florida, and moved to New York, where she graduated from NYU with a master's degree in psychology. She's the co-author of the new book, The Knowing, 11 Lessons to Understand the Quiet Urges of Your Soul, which explores how she was able to return to the teachings of her father, Dr. Wayne Dyer, after he passed away. This is Saje and Serena Dyer's voyage from loss to understanding, how they learned, forgot, and rediscovered their knowing, and how readers can discover theirs as well. She also published a children's book titled Goodbye Bumps that tells a true story of how she was able to heal herself as a child through the power of the mind. Saje often traveled with her dad to speak to his audiences, and she recently appeared on PBS Special. Being the youngest of 8 children, family is and always has been an important part of her life. Saje, welcome to the show, Passion, Love, Pursuit. I am so excited to have you on. I know we were supposed to have Serena on as well, but I know that you have so many stories to share and so many experiences that I know there's so many gifts you will share with us today. So I know that even that Serena is not on the show right now to bring as much as you will bring to the show, I know you're going to share such wisdom with us today. And I'm just so excited. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so excited. And yes, she's definitely sorry she couldn't be here, but there'll be another time, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Well, just so you know, I committed to reading your book, The Knowing, and I always like to read my guest books beforehand so I could really bring a lot to the interview. And let me just tell you, this book in particular came at the most divine timing, as I know you speak a lot about for myself because of something I'm going through, which is processing the possible if you want to say end of time for my dog. And I know, it's different, a human, a dog is, but we all grieve.
It's still grief. I agree. I lost a dog a couple years ago, so I can totally relate and understand.
Yeah. So at the time I got this is when we learned that my dog's cancer has progressed. And so we have to now treat him with more aggressive chemo. And so when I started reading this book, I was in absolute despair, grief, and just fear, to be honest. So I started reading this, and I just want to bring this up that literally this book at the right time kind of saved me mentally and just put me in a space of surrender and just peace, if you want to say. So I just thank you for that, because this was absolutely a gift to me. And I know anybody that's going to tune into this episode, first of all, highly recommend this book because there's so much profound wisdom in this book. And I know it's the teachings of your father, Dr. Wayne Dyer, but the way you share the story and the lessons you've learned through your father is just profound. And I just think so many people are going to be impacted by the book, The Knowing, and also, of course, what you're going to share today on the episode. So thank you for the gifts.
Well, yes, thank you so much. I'm so happy you enjoyed the book. And I agree. I mean, with your dog, it's like, you're going to fight a losing battle if you resist it, and you're not going to be able to dive into the time you have left with your dog here in the physical, as well as the miracles that can take place once he leaves. And, I think, like you said, surrendering isn't I think there's this idea from some people that it's like, I'm surrendering, I give up, but it's not giving up. It's really just allowing that higher consciousness, that higher energy to move through you, because you're getting out of your own way with your mind and everything it's going to tell you about how this is going to be awful and sad and all of that. You get that out of the way so you can experience the miracle. And I think when you can truly surrender is when, I mean, for me, we wrote a whole part in the book about surrendering. So, it's like when you are convinced that something is a certain way, you are in your own way of experiencing the miracle that is wrapped up inside of every experience that we're handed, hardships as well as gifts, all of that. There's always something to glean from an experience, a positive thing to take away. And you have to get out of your own way sometimes to experience that.
Yeah, I think surrender is probably one of the hardest things for anybody to practice in their life. But I think that is, as you're speaking about it, that's when the real gifts and the real peace and the understanding and the lessons really take place, is when you actually are able to just let go and surrender. But we'll talk deeper into that. But just to start off this, I would love to hear, so your father's Dr. Wayne Dyer. He has impacted me profoundly in my life. I was actually listening to his meditation last night before I went to bed. His one particular meditation that he shares to listen over and over. So it was just, in everything I've learned in this book, and also just listening to him, it has changed my perspective of life, existence, connection, peace, that knowing. And I know many that will probably tune into this episode, they have been impacted by his words as well. And I know you two daughters and also the whole family, which there's 8 siblings, have been impacted by your father in a whole different way, and also by his teaching. So first, I would like to ask you, Saje, is when you think of your father, what is your experience, or what do you feel is the experience of his presence? What do you first think of?
Yeah, I mean, when I think of my dad, we all know those people who have those personalities and those energies that are almost like addicting, that you're just you want to be around them all the time. When you are with them, you feel better about yourself. You're happier. My dad was one of those people, and times a million. When you were in his presence, it was just fun. He was one of the, one thing that I think doesn't always translate through his work, and sometimes it does, especially his like live speaking engagements and stuff like that. But it's just that he was very funny. He was always having fun, and when you were in his presence, you were having fun too. And he just had a way of drawing people in. I mean, I watched really both my parents. Always looking to help other people. If my dad went for a walk every day where he lived in Hawaii, along like this sidewalk where you pass by some hotels and stuff like that. So there's a lot of people out on the beach and all along this boardwalk. He would get stopped all the time by somebody who recognized him. Every single time he got stopped, he took the time to make that person feel like they had his full attention, and to allow them to share their story, take the pictures. He often invited people back to his condo so he could give them books. He said, meet me there at 3:00 and I'll sign some books for you. And he never got too famous or big for those kinds of moments and connections with people. And my mom was the same way. I remember being in line with my mom in a grocery store once, and there was a woman buying all these groceries, and then it got to the end and she didn't have enough money, or she just had enough money. It became apparent that, she didn't have a lot and she was pregnant. So my mom got her address and brought over all this baby stuff that she no longer needed, and brought it to this woman and bought her new stuff. And just things like that I witnessed growing up, that you can just care for other people. And it not only serves you, it not only serves them, but it serves you in a huge way as well. And I think of my dad, he had a presence of love. I think that joy and fun are a big part of love. So when I say that he's funny, and he just was bigger than life. His personality was just, I would get dressed in the morning and I'd say, I'm going to go out for a walk. I'm going to go exercise. And then I'd be an hour and a half later, still haven't left because we got into a deep conversation and I'm just having too much fun and I don't want to leave, things like that. He was just a big ball of fun.
That's amazing. Oh, yeah. I love hearing that. So let's go back to, we're going to obviously go into all the lessons you share in the book and everything, but I want to hear, when your family heard of your father's passing, where were you, and was it a shock to you? If you could share kind of the experience of learning about his passing.
Yeah, so it was definitely a shock. I was in my apartment in New York City. I live in New York still, different apartment. But I had just returned from a trip with him where we were traveling through Australia and New Zealand. He was giving like lectures every couple days in different cities, and he invited my sister Sky and I to come with him on this trip. And I would get on stage and tell a short story, and then Sky would sing. So we were kind of part of the show, and it was like 3 week trip, and we just had a blast. And so and my dad was very full of life on this whole trip. He was not sick. He was at his best. His talks were incredible. I sat through, my sister and I, even though it was every couple days there was one, we went to all of them. So I was really immersed in his work, and just came back having had so much fun with him and such a great experience. And so I got back on August 28th, and he died on August 30th through the night. So I got that call sometime through the night in Hawaii. So I got that call sometime in the afternoon on the 30th. And um, Serena called me and she said, "Are you alone?" And I said, "No, I'm with Anthony, who was my boyfriend at the time, now my husband." And she said, "Are you sitting down?" And I said, "What are you talking about? Just speak." No, I'm not sitting down. I could start to sense that there was some sort of urgency behind what she was saying. And she said the words, "Dad doesn't have a pulse." And I immediately went into like a panicked state where because the way she phrased it as "Dad doesn't have a pulse" made me think that he was in an ambulance being resuscitated in some way. I didn't know what had happened, but those words drove me to that conclusion. So I kept saying, "Is he going to be okay? Is he going to be okay?" And I'm panicking. And then I lost my touch with the moment, and I dropped the phone and I started crying. I think I knew before she said the words. I understood that how this was going to end, even though she hadn't said it yet and I hadn't heard that yet. And my husband Anthony ran over because he saw that what was going on, and he picked up the phone because he could hear Serena screaming through the speaker on the floor. And he picked up the phone and he said, "What's going on?" And she told him that my dad was dead. So he said it to me, even though I already knew. And it was just shock. It really was shock because like I said, my dad was so full of life,
Yeah.
and this was so unexpected. And but I will say that it didn't take long. I mean, I was very distraught. That day was hard, and I don't even fully remember what we did that day. But I went to Florida the next day to be with my family because that's where most of my family was, and it did not take long for me and all of my siblings to start to experience the miraculous side of death, because there really is. I mean, it's a if you choose for it to be, it can be a dive into like a faith that, but before that I had never lost anybody that I was close to, so I wasn't challenged in that way. And so even though my dad spoke about death and what happens, it's just a shedding of the physical. We don't go anywhere. I had never internalized any of that because it didn't apply to me. So for the first time, I felt like, am I going to believe everything my dad taught about and feel that I can still connect with him, or am I just going to believe that he's gone? Because right now it just sort of feels like he's gone, and it was devastating. But I wrote about in the book how it was sort of a returning to my dad's teachings that led me to him. And now I feel so connected to him, and I experience signs, and I feel guided by him. Before I do an interview like this, all the time I close my eyes and I say, "Dad, speak through me, speak with me, be with me." And I feel him with me when I do
That's
things like this, and other things as well.
Yeah. And I know also what you talk about it in the book is that your father seemed to know when he was leaving the
Yeah.
physical body. And I know
Hmm.
there was signs that kind of showed that that was the case. Can you share some of those?
Yeah, for sure. After he died, we started reflecting on different ways that he definitely had prepared, even though he was so healthy and there was no sign in his health that he was going to be leaving anytime soon. He had started to make some preparations like the year before. The biggest one for me was I was in graduate school getting a master's degree in psychology in New York, and it was a 3-year program, and I had already gone to college for 4 years and all that. My dad had a way of he paid for my college, my siblings' college, all of that, and I'm very grateful for that. I realize not everyone is that fortunate, but he had a way of doing it, which was that he would write us a check for an entire semester that included the tuition and our living expenses, and we were supposed to budget that, might pay the tuition, and then budget the rest of the money so that it lasted the entire semester. And he did that for me throughout all 4 years of college. And I had already been in 1 year of grad school. He did that for all 7 of my siblings who are older than me. This was his method of doing it, one semester at a time. And so the January before he passed away, he gave me a check for that semester. And but about 2 weeks later, I had been with him in Hawaii, and I left and went home to New York, started my semester. About 2 weeks later, he called me and said, I just want you to know that I just mailed you a check for all of your remaining semesters, 4 or 5 more semesters at NYU. It's an expensive school. And I want you to cash that check and just make sure you budget it. And I was like, Dad, why would you do that? That's so much money. Like, I'm so uncomfortable by that. Please, like, I'm so grateful, but it's unnecessary. Let's just keep doing it the way we've been doing it. And he insisted, and he said, Sage, I insist that you cash that check and that you budget it. And I pushed and pushed, and he just kept insisting. Like I said, my dad was always fun and exciting. He was being very serious on this call. And so I said, okay, Dad, but why? I'll do it, but why are you changing it? We've always done it this way. And he said, if anything were to happen to me, I want to make sure that I fulfilled my promise to all of my children that I would put you through as much school as you wanted to, because he valued education so much. And he said, I want to make sure that I fulfill my promise, and so I'm just giving you the rest in case anything were to happen to me. And hearing him talk like that was actually very upsetting. I was like, why are you even talking like this? I don't, it made me feel like, why is he thinking like this? But 9 months later, not even 8 months later, he passed away. And I don't know what I would have done to finish school, and I probably would have figured it out, but it was important to him that he take care of that. I think that was something his soul needed to ensure that he wrap up, on his physical journey before he departed. And when I realized that he had done that, I was like, wow. I sitting here wondering, if I had only been there when he had a heart attack, or if he had had the heart attack when we were in Australia, I would have been there. I could have called 911, but he was back in Maui by himself. When I realized that, I thought, there is no what if. This was perfectly, divinely timed and orchestrated. This was his, we celebrate our birthday so much. It's all on time. Nobody questions it. He used to say, you should do the same for your death day. We shouldn't question the death of our loved ones. We all come here with a round trip ticket. And when I realized that he was making these preparations, because there were other things he did for my other siblings, for my mom, that I was able to get in touch with that idea that this was on time. It doesn't mean it doesn't still hurt, but that it was on time. It wasn't an accident.
Yeah. And you talk about that you were a skeptic and as well a believer. So before his passing, you didn't necessarily, I imagine you believed his teachings and everything, but were you putting it into practice into your life, a lot of the things he taught, or not until after his passing did you actually really start to look at his teachings in a different light?
Yeah, I definitely started to look at them in a different light. I would describe myself before he passed away as definitely a skeptic, a believer, but also a skeptic. I always believed in what my dad taught, but I was also skeptical of a lot of it, just because I was young. I still am young, but I hadn't experienced a lot of loss and a lot of just things in my life that challenged my beliefs. When things are going well for you, it's easy to have faith. And so it was when he died that I felt like it was very challenging for me. I had just been immersed in so much of his work, and was I going to be able to apply it the way that I watched him help other people apply it to their lives who were struggling with something. And I remember in those early days, I was sort of challenging my dad, like, well, then prove to me that you're still here if it's true, And I don't think that spirit responds to that sort of energy, not because they don't want to, but I think when you're vibrating at a certain frequency, you can just connect better with your loved ones. Esther Hicks used to talk about how when her husband Jerry passed away, she spent her whole career connecting with spirit, but when her husband passed away, she couldn't connect with him. And it wasn't until she recognized that her energy was down here, down low. If you can't see me, I'm putting my hand down low, and her husband was now in this world of no form where he's vibrating so high, and she needed to elevate her energy to be at the same place as Jerry, to be able to connect with him. She calls it going to her high flying disc. And Serena remembered that actually, and we talked about it a little, and I thought, like, okay, I need to elevate myself. But anyway, there was a moment for me in the shower when I was like, because I kept having these thoughts of, like, I would be caught up in my grief, and I would be crying and processing everything, and I would think, okay, just call dad. It's like your subconscious hasn't fully registered that you can't do that anymore. So then it would like hit me all over again, like a ton of bricks, and I would break down. So I kept doing that to myself. It was like torture, until one day I said, Sage, you're not going to be able to call dad again, but you have a lifetime of knowing him, of loving him, of being loved by him. What would he say to you right now in this moment? And I heard him. I connected with him in that moment, and I felt like he told me, like, in my mind, but I didn't hear him out loud, but I felt connected to him in my mind. And I was reminded of a story that he had just told on stage many times. And it was about a man whose son was away at war, and the son dies in battle. And the father gets a knock on the door to be told that his son had died that day. And that night he goes into town, and he goes to a party, and he's dancing. And a neighbor sees him and knows what he had just learned had happened to his son today. And so she goes up to him and says, I don't understand how you could be here dancing when you just learned that your son passed away just today. And he responded to her and said, sooner or later, I'm going to have to move on from this, or it's going to kill me. It's just too much. I'm just choosing sooner. And I heard my dad tell that story so many times, but I hadn't thought of it I hadn't thought of it one time since I got back from Australia, and something put that into my mind. And I thought, yes, I can just choose sooner. I don't have to stay stuck down here. I can choose sooner to elevate my energy, the way that I'm feeling, and it doesn't mean that you don't grieve, because grieving is important. And it doesn't mean that there weren't times that you are sad, because of course, but it means that you can choose also to at times feel joy, feel happiness. And it was when I was choosing joy and happiness that I felt connected to him. And the grief and the sadness was still a part of my journey, and it was important, but I didn't get the signs and the connection with him until I was able to elevate the way that I was feeling. Mm-hmm. It was, so then after I did, had that experience, I started to be open to the things that my dad taught. I started to listen to his lectures and to ask him for signs. And that's when I started to get them. And that's when I started to feel, or just know, that he was still with me. But it was a journey, and it was a shedding of that skeptical side of myself. And it was not instant.
I love that story of choosing sooner. It's such a great story. And I think that when people are in grief, they feel almost that, oh, I must I must stay in this to honor the passing of this person, that I can't feel joy now. And I think somewhat I was feeling that when I was dealing with this over the past couple weeks, as hard as it is, I was definitely in this negative state, very fearful, thinking the worst. And when there became this light, this hope of a new chemo treatment for my dog or whatnot, I started to find peace and surrender, and just more, that hope gave me more this positive state of mind, if you want to say. And as I was
Mhm.
shifting into that, somewhat I started to think, well, people will think everything's okay. And so I was kind of getting into this mindset, like people won't understand that I'm still fearful, but I'm just trying
Right.
to switch into the positive state of mind. So I'm curious, for people that are in any sort of grief, or dealing with somebody that is possibly sick or not in the best state, how would you suggest for them to move into this higher frequency? Like, what was your process to switch in from this fear to
Yeah.
surrender and peace?
Um, yeah, well, and just to touch on one thing you just said too, my dad always used to say, what other people think of you is none of your business, you know? And I think as a society, we have to start to recognize that grief is a personal, individual process, and nobody should be judged by their grieving process. If for you it means staying home and isolating for a little while or a long while, that's okay. And if for somebody else it means being around people and, you know, feeling joyful and having their moments of sadness be private, that's okay too. I mean, however it looks for you is okay. And if other people are judging you, that's just none of your business, you know? Um, but wait, sorry, tell me again the
So
end of the question.
yes, so if somebody is dealing with grief and they're suffocated by it, but they
Right.
want to be able to move into a higher frequency and be positive and start to heal. What was your process of moving into surrender and peace, and looking for the signs and finding the blessings, where obviously at first when you're in grief, it's hard to see a positive side of things. So I'm
Yeah.
curious what you started to do or what you recommend for others.
Yeah. I mean, when you're in that grief, a minute feels like a year. You know, it's hard to see beyond your grief, I think, especially in those first few days. And I would recommend just feeling that at the beginning. But when you're ready and when it starts to feel okay, uh, talk to your loved one. Ask them to visit you in a dream. Ask them to give you a sign. And then I would say do things that make you feel good if you can, you know, whatever that looks like for you. Go for me to go into that place of joy. The thing that I did that helped me the most was sitting around with my siblings and talking about our dad, funny stories and memories. And we would be laughing hysterically that sometimes would lead to crying hysterically. But we definitely were raising our vibration in those moments and celebrating his life. And that made me feel better when and then diving into spiritual work. I mean, there's so much available out there on how to on just what happens after we pass away, what because we, you know, we live our life through these with our five senses. That's how we learn everything we know about what's around us, what we see, what we hear, what we smell, what we can touch. And unless you challenge this idea, everything you know comes to you through those five senses. And you have to start to recognize that we are so limited by what we can perceive in our world. I mean, even just right now, it's like I know that there are AM and FM radio waves moving through the room that I'm sitting in, but because I'm not a radio with an antenna, I can't perceive them. I can't pick them up. I don't know what they feel like or what they look like, but I know that they're there. And I think you have to start to challenge the things that you know, quote unquote, know through your physical five senses, because there is so much more that we can't possibly know, that there has to be a leap of faith in a way. And once I started to recognize that, like I'm just, you know, I think I'm sitting on this chair in my room right now in my apartment and I'm sitting still, but in reality, I'm sitting on a rock that's hurling through space at, very quickly and turning on different axes, and there's no such thing as sitting still. But that's your perception is your reality. So challenge those beliefs, get comfortable with the idea that we can't possibly know everything that's out there. And I also think, for me, after my dad passed away, I got very in touch with meditation. My dad always used to quote Herman Melville, who said, God's one and only voice is silence. And you have to invite some silence into your life. And the best way to do that for me has been meditation, because you're giving your mind a break. It's like our minds are running a million miles an hour, and you're always having thought after thought after thought. And it can be hard to tap into like universal wisdom that's available to all of us if your mind is just going, going, going. If you make meditation a practice, for me, it didn't happen right away. It was after I was doing it for like 2 or 3 weeks, consistently every day for about 20 minutes. I started to feel like I could connect with my dad at will. I had that space between my thoughts where I just felt more connected, not just to him, but to my knowing, to just a higher frequency that could guide me. And instead of, I remember one time I was sitting in the car with my dad, and the song I Hope You Dance came on the radio. And he said, oh, I just love this song. And he turned it up and he said, okay, I love this song, but there's one line in the song I don't agree with. He said, otherwise, I love every line. I think it's beautiful. But there's one line I don't agree with. If you haven't heard the song, it's full of cliche lines like, I hope you never fear those mountains in the distance. I hope you dance. If you get the chance to sit it out or dance, things like that. So anyway, we listened to the whole song, and I don't remember if I figured it out or not, but at the end of the song, he said, when she says, I hope you never settle for the path of least resistance. I disagree with that. I think you should always take the path of least resistance, because when the universe is offering you resistance, it's for a reason. It's because something that when you're feeling like you're having to force and push, you should take a look at that. But when at other times when everything's just flowing to you easily, it's like you make a decision. I want to start a new business, and then the next day somebody calls and says, oh, my friend is trying to lease this place over here, and everything just starts to fall into place for you. It's like, that you're going with the flow of energy. And when the opposite happens, when you're getting all red lights and roadblocks, it's like, I think we have to take a look at that as well. And yeah, that's how I think when you get into meditation, you're able to connect with those kinds of knowings, with that kind of, to flow onto this path of least resistance, to get all green lights. And so that's one thing I really recommend, is starting a meditation practice.
I love when when you shared in the book about the green lights, how he would always close off his messages with, what was it? And green lights. I forgot the whole thing.
I wish you love and all green lights, or I send you love and all green lights.
Yeah. It was so funny when we were supposed to record last week, the day of, I was driving around and I've never seen this before. I saw painted on a wall, it said green lights. I'm like, wow. I was just like in awe, because, I've never seen that. And we talk about seeing these signs, but we have to be open to receive them and noticing them. And that's when you get into this space of just kind of the surrender and letting life flow to you. And I know one of the greatest sayings your father always said was, be open to everything, attached to nothing. And so that goes to the resistance and what's red lights and green lights. And I think it's such a profound, simple saying that could radically change your life by just listening to that, is learning to practice surrender and just flowing with life to let blessings come in. So it's really a different way to live, if you want to say.
Right. Yeah, no, it's have a mind that is open to everything and attached to nothing. And what I take away from that too is that, like, you can have a desire, something that you want to have come into your life, and you put it out there. But if you are so fixated on how it comes to you, you might miss the presentation of it to you, because it could just be packaged in a way that's different than what you expected. So it's like, I think in life you have to put your desires out there, whether it's through prayer, journaling, a vision board, but then let go of the attachment of how and when it shows up. Because that's when you miss it, I think. It's like when you have that attachment to it, you have to be able to let that go, which can be the hardest part.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the other thing about, because I know your father talks a lot about manifestation, and one of the greatest sayings, again, one of my other favorites, is you don't get what you want, you get who you are, or
Yeah.
the awareness to that you attract what you are. And I
Right.
think that is one thing that is so profound as well. Can you speak to that, of how you learned that teaching in your life?
Yeah. I think it even speaks to what I was talking about before with, like, you want to connect with your loved one, but they're vibrating up here and you're vibrating down here, and there's just a disconnect, but they're there. It's up to you to elevate your frequency up to them. And I think it's a similar concept of, right, you don't get in life what you want, you get what you are. My dad always used to point out to me that I was stingy, not stingy, but I had an attachment to money, especially growing up. I was like, no, just counting my pennies. And because I got that from him, he was like that too. And he had to unlearn it through his life. And so he was always pointing that out to me. And as I've gotten older, I've become much more free and generous because of what I learned from him, which is, you don't get in life what you want. If you want to be abundant, you have to um, you have to live abundantly, which means being generous. If you're hoarding everything, the universe is going to hoard from you as well. If you go out into the world and say, gimme, 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 the universe is going to say, gimme, gimme, gimme back. But if you say, how may I serve? How may I, the universe will say to you, how may I serve you? And I think that it's true for abundance too. I mean, he used to say, you can go to the ocean every day and you can take a tiny little eyedropper full of water, which is like a metaphor for abundance, money, not just money. I think of abundance as just like a full life, a full heart. So, but anyway, you can go there and you can take just a dropper full, or you can go with a 18-wheeler truck and you can load up the whole thing every single day. And the ocean will never cease to miss any of that because it's infinitely abundant. And I think to tap into that truckload full, you have to become that way internally. You have to live from that place. So yeah, that's I love that line of his as well, and that's one way that it's really applied to me,
It's
was
amazing.
learning to be abundant and then attract abundance into my life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know you also shared in the book, speaking about all the signs that you received from your father, I know there's lots of stories, and Serena also shares hers. One of the ones that I want to pull out that I think is just so profound is the day of his death, which was August 30th. And I believe it was Serena that discovered the
No, it
meaning
was
of
me
that. Oh,
actually.
it was you.
It was me.
Okay.
Yeah, it was
Then
me.
great.
Yeah.
I would love if you
Yeah.
could share that story, because I think it is absolutely profound and kind of mind blowing, to be honest.
Yeah, no, it was for me also. I mean, this was yeah, so when my dad was alive, he was very into numbers and synchronicity through numbers, and he was always looking for signs with numbers. And he loved to see the clock at 11:11. One summer he had this whole thing about that. So then we were all trying to see the clock at 11:11. Anyway, he just had a thing with numbers. And so when and I love numbers as well. So when he died, I thought, like I said, I was challenging him a lot at the beginning. So I thought, if everything he taught were true, then I feel he would have not just died on any day, there would have been some significance to the date that he decided that was divinely orchestrated for him to depart. And at first I couldn't figure it out. My dad loved the number 18. It's August 30th, 2015. It didn't add up to 18 or 11 or any of the things that would have been significant to him or to me. So I just sort of put it out there to the universe that I wanted to figure out what this August 30th meant. And then I did detach myself from it, which is kind of like what we were talking about. And I was reading his book, I Can See Clearly Now, after he passed away, because that was his sort of like memoir, the only book he wrote that was more of a memoir. And I felt called to read it after he had died. I had read a little bit of it when he was alive, but I didn't finish it. So I was reading it, and there's a whole chapter in there about really the most significant events that took place in his life. And what it was that, so when my father was born, his father left his family, walked out. He never met him. My grandmother came home from the hospital with my dad. They had two other boys. My dad was the youngest. When she got home from the hospital, he had left and he never came back. So he never met his son, Wayne. And as my dad got older, and because of that, my dad and his brothers wound up in orphanages and foster care. And because my grandmother just couldn't afford to take care of three boys on her own. This was the 1940s, the Great Depression, all of that. So they wound up in foster care and things like that. And then eventually my grandmother got them back together. And as my dad became an adolescent and a teenager, he became very fixated on finding his father. And he also became just sort of filled with rage for his father. He wanted to find him and he wanted to give him a piece of his mind, because he just couldn't believe that this man could walk out on him and his two brothers and his mother during a time of such need. And he just wanted to give him a piece of his mind. And he was searching and searching for him, and to no end. He couldn't ever find him. And he was also having nightmares at night about finding his father and punching him in the face and screaming at him and all kinds of things. And it really consumed him for a long time. And at a certain point, when he was much older, close to his 30s, he learned that his father had actually died a few years before. And he had still even been searching during that time. He even went to his mother's funeral, like his grandmother's funeral, because he thought for sure his father would show up at this funeral. And he had learned about it through a cousin, but he didn't come. And when he was in his late 20s, early 30s, he learned that his father had died, and a lot of his search had been in vain because he had been dead for a few years. But then he came to find out where his father was buried, in Biloxi, Mississippi. And through a series of really crazy, incredible coincidences, my father wound up at his father's gravesite. And you can read about them, and I Can See Clearly Now. I don't want to get them wrong. So, but they're really incredible how he wound up there. And because it was I don't know what the name is, but it's basically a gravesite for people who families couldn't afford to bury them in a proper grave, so there's not a lot of documentation on those sorts of cemeteries and things like that. So anyway, he winds up at his father's grave, and he goes there with the intention of literally pissing on his grave, screaming at him, getting all this anger out that he has lived with for most of his life. And he goes there and he does that. He gets the screaming out. He gets the rage out. He has this conversation he's been wanting to have with his father to his grave. And then he turns to leave, because that was his intention of going, and he did it. And as he's walking back to his car, he starts to feel an overwhelming presence of love, something completely opposite of what he had been feeling while at that grave. And he feels called to turn around and go back to the grave. He has this understanding that he's not done yet. So he goes back, he listens to it, and he says to his father, "I forgive you. I forgive you." And he says it over and over again. And he's overwhelmed by this feeling of love and forgiveness that came for him out of nowhere. He had no intention of forgiving his father on this day. And he's crying, and he just starts to say, from now on, from this day forward, I send you nothing but love. I forgive you. I understand. I didn't walk in your shoes, things like that. And he leaves, and his whole life changed from that day. His career took off. He got out of a relationship and into a new relationship. He wrote his book, Your Erroneous Owns, which was like the best-selling book of the 70s. He wrote it like just a month later, in 2 weeks. He wrote the entire book, and on and on. Anyway, the day that he forgave his father at his father's gravesite was August 30th of, I believe it was 1976. And he says in his own words, if you were to ask me what this most significant day of my life was, it was the events that took place on August 30th of 1976 at my father's gravesite. And he says that it's the day that his relationship with his father changed to take on an entirely new meaning that really fueled his whole career, because his career was based on love and forgiveness. And he had to experience that sort of profound forgiveness, where it's you go from the extreme of hate for years and years and years to a place of love and forgiveness in order to really understand it and be able to teach it to other people. Mm. And he chose to depart his physical form on the same day that he got the biggest lesson of his life of love and forgiveness. And I felt like what he was saying to me as his daughter, by choosing that date, I think it has so many profound meanings, but one of the ones that immediately stuck out to me was that he is telling me that this day is the day that, the relationship with his father changed to take on a whole new meaning. Just like my relationship with him, it did not end on August 30th. It just changed to take on a whole new meaning. And it's now with him, I have to know that he's with me, because I can't see him anymore and I can't touch him. And it has become a really profound relationship, but it's very different than it was before August 30th. And when I had that realization, I was so overcome with emotion, because I just felt like he was saying so much by the day that he chose to leave. And I'm not saying everybody has that story. My dad had a thing with numbers, and I felt that I knew somewhere inside that it had meaning. I was just connected to this idea that it had meaning. And then I discovered it. And I told my whole family. We were all like, we were just in awe of this whole idea. It's crazy.
I think it's I love that story. And I think it's so important that you share it, because I think forgiveness is one of those things, besides surrender, is the hardest thing for people to do, especially when somebody has wronged them or hurt them, is to forgive them and also themselves, and live in this part of grief where you're like, I wish I coulda, shoulda, and all that. So moving to forgiveness is one of the hardest things to do. So I think that's why it's so important. So in saying that story, I'm just out of curiosity, like, how do you practice forgiveness in your life? If any of your experience you've had, what would you recommend to others to practice forgiveness and like release those chains that leave them tied to a situation or any resentment?
Yeah. Right. I mean, if I'm being completely honest, I haven't been challenged in this lifetime with forgiveness. Serena has, and she talks a lot about that because she lost her stepson. Her stepson passed away when he was 19 years old. This was maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. And she, it was her stepson, and she was only like 13 years older than him, because her husband had him before they were married, way before they were married, and he was very young when he had him also. So they didn't have the best relationship always, even though, from my perspective, she was a great stepmom and he loved her very much. But from her perspective, she sometimes resented him, and he was, a teenager, and he made messes, and he wasn't the easiest teenager. And she had to, so then he died, and she didn't feel that she ever got to get close with him in that way. And she just all she could think about was all of the ways that she judged him, all of the times he annoyed her, that she maybe made him feel like he was a nuisance and things like that. Which, like I said, I know their relationship and I know that he loved her and felt loved by her, but she had to forgive herself for those things. And I think that is a really difficult type of forgiveness when you lose a child, you know. We did an interview with Scarlett Lewis. Do you know her?
No, I don't.
She was the mother of, she is the mother of one of the children who died in Sandy Hook,
Oh,
the
okay.
shooting at
Yes.
the elementary
Yeah.
school. Yeah. And she talked to us about that as well, how first and foremost she had to forgive herself because he was, I think, 5 years old, who hasn't yelled at their child at times. You know, she said she went through all the times that she put him in timeout or that she lost her temper or she could have done more. So first and foremost, she had to forgive herself. And secondarily, she got to the point where she forgave the shooter,
Hmm.
and she professed that forgiveness to, you know, his family, that she forgave him. And I don't even know how that's possible. She's my hero. I mean, it's just incredible that she is capable of that kind of forgiveness. But her story is really amazing. The changes that happened for her after she shed that hate. Obviously, I mean, it's beyond hate that you would have for the man who shot your son. So I think forgiveness is extremely powerful. And the truth is, you know, there's the quote about the forgiveness is the fragrance that that the violet sheds on the heel that has crushed it.
Love that.
You receive the benefits of the forgiveness. It's for yourself, but it's not easy. You hold on to resentment and feelings about something or someone, and it doesn't go away in an instant. I think it's a lot of inner work.
Absolutely. And your father always shared the story that you'll never die by the snake bite, you die by the venom that seeps through
Exactly.
your blood. Yeah, that such a great way to look at how, if you don't forgive, how much it affects you, not them.
Right.
It like you said, it's a process and a practice to get to that place, but it's essential as far as you share the story of your father, how much it transformed his whole life. So
Right. I definitely would recommend Scarlett's book about, because it's
mm,
about forgiveness for
wow.
anybody who's it's called Choose Love.
Thank you for
And
that.
yeah.
Yeah. I just have a couple more questions. So I know one thing that you talk about is the common question you're asked is living in purpose, and what does that look like? And I know when you found out you're pregnant, it was unexpected, and you thought that, oh, I can't live my purpose because I'll be a mom now. And I love how you share that, what purpose means to you and what your
Yeah.
realization.
Right. Yeah. Like you said, when I found out I was pregnant, I was just full of it. It was sort of unexpected. I mean, I was married. I knew what we were doing. I'm an adult. You know, I know what can happen from what we were doing, but it still was unexpected. And it just happened quickly, which I know is a miracle and a blessing. But for me, it was just all I could think about was how my life was never going to be the same, how any shot at having a career was over. That's what I had convinced myself of, and how my only purpose now would be to be a mom. And it didn't make me happy to think about those things. I was anxious a lot, especially the first few months of the pregnancy. And I convinced myself that I would never have a career. So, but Serena and I had already written a lot of this book, like probably 75% of it. And we had sort of stopped working on it and it fell by the wayside. Finding out I was pregnant and having these sorts of thoughts about how, you know, my chance at a career is ending in 8 months, led me to getting back on the book. And I contacted our literary agent and publishing company, and we got the book published during that time because I was so convinced that that was all the time I had left. So it actually, these thoughts served a purpose in my life. But um, after my son was born, I realized that, and at a certain point in my pregnancy, it was a big surrendering process to just saying, you know, I know that this isn't going to be bad. I know it's going to be a beautiful thing. I'm going to love my child. Just starting to surrender to those thoughts. I love the mantra of I can choose to see this differently. So I just kept saying that I choose to see this differently now. And it started to become different for me. And after he was born, I realized that so many of many of the thoughts I had were true. My life did change a lot. I don't travel unencumbered, and yeah, I don't have a lot of freedom in a lot of ways, but it turns out that it was nothing to fear for me. It was the whole experience has been beautiful, and I find myself so happy. And I I heard the quote, or I read the quote of when he was like a couple months old, of there is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way. And I've heard that quote a million times. And it resonated with me in that moment in a different way. I just recognized that there is no way to happiness. Staying without children and, single and traveling and doing whatever I wanted was not the way to happiness. Neither is becoming a mother. Neither is any one specific thing you can think of. Happiness is the way. I bring my happiness to my job as a mother, to anything that I'm doing in my life, and it becomes a happy job. And I realized also shortly after that I like to think of our purpose in a similar way. I think that there's this pressure in your life to find your purpose, find your purpose. Like I felt like I was pregnant and I hadn't found my purpose. So now my only purpose could be being a mom. And I don't think that that's true at all anymore. I think that as we go through life, our purpose is going to shift and evolve and take on entirely new meanings. And I think that you can find purpose in everything that you're doing. And when you're a child, there is a purpose to that. And when you're a teenager, there's a purpose. And when you're in your 20s, you might be having, I don't think your purpose is a career either. It's you bring purpose to everything you do in your life. If it's your career, then what? When you're retired in your 60s, are you purposeless? No, of course not. It's just taking on a different meaning at different times in your life. So I had that realization because I had put this pressure on myself to find my purpose, and then I felt like my time to find it was running out. And I had my baby, and none of that's true. I find great purpose and happiness in being a mother, and I find great purpose and happiness in doing interviews like this and writing our book. And I'm sure I will do other things as well.
I love that you share that, because I think a lot of people need to hear that. So I know we have to wrap up. I ask
Yeah.
all my guests one question, and I really would love to hear this because I know you share your lessons of your father's teachings. But I'm curious, asking you, if you were to leave a piece of advice through your journey or whatever the greatest lesson you have learned, what do you feel advice that anybody needs to hear right now from you?
I mean, it's hard to chalk it up to one thing, but what came to mind when you asked me that, and one thing I've really been trying to practice lately is something that when my dad was younger. So anyway, what we've been talking about, elevating your vibration, all of that, it sounds good in theory, but sometimes you don't feel like you can do that. There are days where I feel great and it's easy, and there are days where I feel down and it's not so easy. And I remembered one thing that my dad talked about when we were younger. He was an avid tennis player, and he used to talk about how some days when he's playing tennis, everything goes right for him. He hits the ball and it stays in by a millimeter, and he's just in this flow where nothing can go wrong. And his opponent is flabbergasted because how is he possibly making these shots? And it feels so good when you're in that zone. And he said, then there are days when your opponent gets in that zone and they're hitting every shot and they're staying in by an inch and it seems impossible. And you just keep playing worse and worse because you're so fixated on how well they're playing and how poorly you're playing. And you just don't feel good about yourself and your energy is low. And he said that he realized that how he can shift back into that zone, into that place of feeling good and having a high vibration frequency, is by having genuine joy and happiness for his opponent when he is in the zone. And that by harboring those feelings of genuine joy for him, it brought him back to that place. And then they would play these incredible games and matches of tennis. And I think that that is a metaphor for life. When you're not feeling happiness for yourself and for what's going on inside, find it for somebody else. Be of service to somebody else. Even if it's just offering a compliment to somebody that you see as you're walking down the street, or picking up, someone drops something, you hand it to them. Do a small act of kindness. I think it benefits them, but it benefits you sometimes even more. And those are the ways to raise your own vibration, is by being of service and having joy for other people when you can't find it for yourself.
So beautifully said. It's so true. And I love that. And I think it is a practice because we get so stuck in our head. And that's the great way to get out of our head, is being of service. So
Right.
beautiful. Sage,
Thank
this
you.
has been such an honor. Like I said, this book is a must read. I've told so many people already to read it.
Thank
It
you.
is just remarkable, and it's touched my life at the most profound time. And like I said, I think so many people are needing this right now. The world needs this. And I just thank you and your sister Serena for the gifts you are sharing with the world, and continuing the teachings of your father. And your father was an absolute great man, obviously still impacting our lives, everybody. And so
Mhm.
thank you for being a part of this and for coming on Passion Love Pursuit. I appreciate you so dearly.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was great. The hour flew by. So thank
I
you.
know, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. I will definitely speak to you soon. Appreciate you.
Okay. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.